The Spartans were one of the most feared and respected forces in the ancient world. A heavily armored warrior with a shield and spear was an iconic sight on the battlefields of Greece. But how did they compare to the Roman legions? Which of these two ancient warriors would have been more effective in battle? Let's find out. Welcome to my channel, where we bring you the most epic clashes from history. Today we are going to take a look at the Spartans versus the Romans, two of the most ferocious warriors from the ancient world. We all know about the famous 300 Spartans who held off the Persian army at the hot gates of Thermopylae. But how did the Romans fare against the Persians? In this episode, we will answer all of these questions and much more. So sit back and enjoy the show. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Which was more effective in battle, the Spartan hoplite or the Roman legionary? When it comes to battles between armies, there is no single decisive factor that leads to victory. There are many variables to consider. For example, terrain, logistics, technology, strategy, tactics, and the physical prowess of the combatants. One of the main advantages of the Spartans was their legendary discipline and endurance. They were also well trained from childhood to be the perfect soldier. And their armor was some of the best of the ancient world. The Romans too had excellent training, and their armor was equally as good. But unlike the Spartans, the Romans were more adaptable in battle. They had experience fighting on all kinds of terrain and in all kinds of weather. The Romans were also more diverse in their choice of weapons and formations. Spartan phalanx was designed for open terrain and did not work very well in rough terrain. It lacked flexibility and mobility. The Romans could switch between different types of infantry depending on the situation. They used light infantry when facing the Gauls and heavy infantry when facing the Carthaginians. The Romans also made great use of cavalry. The Spartans preferred to fight on foot. Though Sparta did have a cavalry force, it was nowhere near as strong as the Roman cavalry. This means that the Romans had the upper hand in almost every type of battle. The Spartans were one of the 7 nations of ancient Greece located in the Peloponnese region. Their society was militaristic, and all able-bodied men were expected to serve in the army. Male citizens were educated together in a communal setting, separated by age groups. At the age of 20, a Spartan youth became an adult and took on more responsibilities. A Spartan's education was harsh and rigorous. Boys were taken from their mothers at age 7 and raised in a communal setting with other boys their age. They lived together in groups of 10 to 12 boys under the supervision of an older boy. At age 12, they were given a red cloak and became known as the Aegage. The Aegage were expected to live by the laws and customs of Sparta. They were taught to read, write, and do basic math. They were also taught to be brave, strong, and obedient. They were trained to fight with weapons such as the sword, spear, and bow and arrow. By age 30, they were considered full-fledged members of society and were expected to marry and have children. Female citizens had more freedom than their counterparts in other Greek city-states, but were still expected to obey male authority. They could own property and were expected to manage their household and family. The Spartans fought with a variety of weapons, but their main weapon was the spear. The Spartan hoplite carried a 7 to 8 foot long wooden spear with a sharp metal point. The spear was used for thrusting and stabbing attacks. Hoplites also carried a round shield called an aspis. The aspis was made of wood and leather and was about 3 feet in diameter. It was used to protect the hoplite from enemy weapons and arrows. Hoplites also carried a sword, dagger, or a small axe as a secondary weapon. The Romans had a highly adaptable military system. They used a combination of heavy and light infantry, cavalry, and artillery. Heavy infantry were usually equipped with armor and weapons like swords and shields, while light infantry were more lightly armed and armored. Cavalry consisted of mounted soldiers who fought with swords, spears, or bows and arrows. Artillery included catapults, ballista, and scorpions. These machines used projectiles to attack enemy fortifications or troops from a distance. In terms of organization, the Roman army was divided into legions, which were the main fighting units. Each legion consisted of several cohorts, which were further subdivided into centuries. The size of a Roman legion varied over time, but typically consisted of around 5,000 soldiers. The Roman army was also supported by auxiliary troops, which included cavalry, light infantry, and artillery. So what happened when these two powerhouses clashed in battle? The most famous battle between the Spartans and the Romans took place at Leuctra in 371 BC. The Spartan king was King Cleombrotus I, and the Roman king was King Hiero II. The Spartans were outnumbered to 2-1, but still managed to defeat the Theban army. This was due to their superior training and experience. The Romans used a combination of heavy and light infantry to great effect. The light infantry harassed the Spartans, while the heavy infantry broke through the Spartan lines and captured the king. The Spartans were forced to flee, and the Thebans won a decisive victory. So, who would win in a battle between the Spartans and the Romans? If we put aside all the myths and legends about the Spartans, we can see that they were indeed a formidable fighting force. However, they were not invincible, as some people believe. In fact, they lost more battles than they won. The Romans, on the other hand, were a highly adaptable and resilient people. They were able to absorb new ideas and technologies from their enemies and incorporate them into their own military system. This made them even more dangerous on the battlefield. The Romans had a disciplined and well-trained army that was organized into legions led by experienced officers. They were also innovative in their use of weapons and tactics, such as the use of the pilum, a heavy javelin that was designed to disrupt enemy formations. The Romans were also skilled engineers and were able to construct roads, bridges, and other infrastructure that allowed them to move their troops quickly and efficiently. On the other hand, the Spartans had a rigid and inflexible military system that was based on tradition and custom. They were also isolated from other Greek city-states and did not have the opportunity to learn from their enemies. The Spartans relied on their superior training and endurance to win battles, but this was not always enough to secure victory. Furthermore, the Romans were able to forge alliances with other Italian tribes and later with Carthage, which gave them access to new resources and manpower. They were also able to conquer new territories and establish settlements throughout the Mediterranean, which provided them with food, supplies, and strategic locations from which to launch their campaigns. In conclusion, it can be said that both the Spartans and the Romans were fierce warriors with unique strengths and weaknesses. While the Spartans were highly trained and disciplined, they lacked the adaptability and innovation of the Romans. The Romans were able to forge alliances, learn from their enemies, and conquer new territories, which gave them the edge on the battlefield. If you enjoyed today's video, check out our other videos on the channel. We have done similar comparisons between other historical warriors and armies. Thank you for watching. Until next time.